All right, so good afternoon. Really excited today to be facilitating our privilege activity. This is something that we've created to share digitally with our fans or stakeholders, the various groups that we work with. And we joined today with Maria Vega and Scott Pioli. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit. And they're gonna be going through this experience that we're facilitating digitally. And they'll tell us more about their experiences with the activity, their experiences with privilege, their experiences with the power that they have based on some of the privilege that they have as well. So, let me start with Scott. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Scott Pioli, and I'm currently on the board at RISE, and have been on the board for a number of years, and been involved in a lot of different projects, and a lot of different pieces, not just as a board member, but some of the activities, not only around the Super Bowl, but Rise to Vote. And this is just the next best one, which I'm excited to be a part of.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Scott. And you, Maria?
My name is Maria Vega. I was involved with the RISE in the leading up to the Super Bowl. I'm still a college athlete. I play soccer at St. Thomas University, and I'm pursuing my master's in ethical leadership.
Thank you for joining us. I know you've been involved in our programming in a number of different ways. So really excited to get your perspective on this activity and this perspective around this topic as well, because I know it's a conversation that we have had in many different ways, in many different contexts. The activity is one where you are experiencing something like a privilege walk in a digital or virtual sense. You're going to see various prompts, and what you need to do is state whether that prompt is true for you, that statement is true for you, or whether that statement is false for you. As you do that, you'll see a little privilege meter at the bottom, either advance or go back. So it'll kind of tell you how your privilege progresses or decreases as you answer true or false. And at the end, we'll have a sense of, cumulatively where your privilege is, and we'll have a discussion about where you end up. So I'll ask you to pull that up now. Make sure you've seen it in front of you. Just for our viewers, what I will do is I will read each prompt and allow us to kind of navigate through it. And once I read that prompt, I'll ask you to then respond to it and go on, and then we go on to the next one. So I will read it, make sure that all of our viewers understand which one you're taking and when. And at the back end, as I said, we will discuss them all. So the first prompt is, I know where I will be living 1 month from now. The first prompt is, I know where I'll be living 1 month from now. Is that true for you? Or is that false for you? I can safely get to a public park or playground. I can safely get to a public park or playground. Is that true? Or is that false? I have never worried about going hungry or having access to a healthy meal. Is that true for you, or is that false for you? I have had access to organized sports. Is that true for you? Is that false for you? I have had access to organized sports. The people I study or studied in history class look like me. The people I study or studied in history class look like me. Yeah. My parent or guardian has a college degree. Is that true for you, or is that false? I feel confident in my future plans to launch or advance my career. I feel confident in my future plans to launch or advance my career. I have never been afraid of violence because of my race or ethnicity. I have never been afraid of violence because of my race or ethnicity. I have never been afraid of violence because of my gender or sexual orientation. I have never been afraid of violence because of my gender or sexual orientation. This one is similar. I have never been afraid of violence because of my religion. Never been afraid of violence because of my religion. I have never been threatened with violence because of my race or ethnicity. I have never been threatened with violence because of my gender or sexual orientation. I've never been threatened with violence because of my religion. I've never been threatened with violence because of my religion. Is that true for you, or is that false for you? Growing up, I had heroes who looked like me. Is that true for you? Growing up, I had heroes who looked like me. I do not need a ramp to access my school, home, or any other building. I do not need a ramp to access my school, home, or any other building. I do not have visible or invisible disabilities. I do not have visible or invisible disabilities. I do not have a foreign accent. I do not have a foreign accent. The religious holidays I celebrate are recognized by my school, place of work, or government. The religious holidays I celebrate are recognized by my school, place of work, or government. Is that true for you or false for you? I feel safe walking alone at night. I feel safe walking alone at night. Last one. I have never been the victim of physical violence. So last prompt, I have never been the victim of physical violence. Is that true for you, or is that false for you? Great, so this slide should give you some indication of how many were true for you and not. If you look at that level bar, that privilege level bar at the bottom, it should give you some sense of your level of privilege relative to where you started. You know, you started somewhere in the middle. And so for you, it would have either decreased or increased as we worked across those prompts. I think a really good place to start is, you know, did you find this was an easy exercise, or was it challenging for you, and why or why not? I think as we talk about privilege, it's not an easy conversation to have. So let's start there. Was this an easy exercise? Is this a challenging exercise? Why or why not?
I think it was a bit challenging, just because I think privilege is really based on perspective. The perspective that you take upon seeing things that happen to you or don't happen to you. So it is a bit challenging, just because there's two sides to the coin. There's two ways you can view it. So
maybe give me an example of one perspective of seeing privilege versus another.
Yeah, so maybe like with the visible or invisible health concerns or disabilities, like maybe like perspective, like I was hurt. I had 2 knee surgeries in less than 8 months when playing soccer.
Right.
And at first I really was questioning everything. I was like, why did I get this? Like, you know, I really thought that I wasn't privileged, and I just wanted to understand why it was happening. But now looking at it, I think that I am privileged that happened to me, because that changed my whole perspective on a lot of things, on the way I view things and how I conduct my life now. So I just think perspective just drives your way of how you view privilege.
Yeah, that's excellent. I like that. Scott?
Yeah, I would say it was not an easy exercise, but for maybe not for the obvious reasons. I think part of what made it difficult was some of the questions weren't true or false, right? There's nuance to some of the answers or some of the questions, and what my answers are. You know, what I wrote a couple down. You know, growing up, I had heroes. That was one of the questions, and yes, I did, but my heroes were both black and white. I think that's part of how I was raised, and the truth about race that I learned at such a young age. So even though I've always had two very clear privileges, being white and being male, I was kind of made aware of them at a very young age. So that was just one question, you know. So I think some of these questions move the needle in terms of my privilege, which is enormous. I understand, know, and accept the privilege that I have. At times I'm embarrassed by it, yet there's not anything I can do to myself to change it. So it's a little bit more complex than some of the just true and false, other than the most obvious factors.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I think as we have discussions about privilege, obviously that nuance is important. People need to recognize, I think to Maria's point as well, and I think, Scott, what you're saying is kind of underscores this, that perspective really matters and is a huge variable in all of this. It's relatively how we are positioned versus others, or relatively how we are positioned today versus how we might be positioned, years from now or down the road. It certainly is a nuanced conversation. But to your point, Scott, I think there are some things that might give us privilege that we are able to change, or others might be able to change, and there are some things that we may not be in control of, like our race, etc. Right. So, but absolutely accept that nuance is there. What I think we want people to understand is, that, can you take on the lens of somebody who may not be sitting or standing in your own shoes, or can you take on the lens of someone who's not in your position?
My life path, I'm an old man now. I'm 55 years old.
Right.
And again, I'm doing this conversation right now, and the background shows this, this exponential privilege. However, my path, from the time that I was born, again, I was born with two extreme elements of privilege. However, there are many challenges along the way. Where I'm at now is very different socioeconomically, educationally, opportunity. So again, what you're seeing right now doesn't necessarily reflect, which goes right back to the fact that I did have an ability to progress, right? And to have access and opportunity more than other people. However, there's, again, what we're seeing right now isn't how it's
started. I think that's spot on. I think a lot of the times people think that if they are, said to have privilege, that it negates all their hard work. And I think that's absolutely false. Like, your hard work is definitely necessary for you to be successful. Nobody is saying that because you're privileged, it means that you didn't work hard or you didn't work as hard as others. I think the question that we want to kind of raise, or the idea that we want people to think about, is that some persons might have it harder given the way in which the world is constructed, or given the way in which institutions run and operate. So I think you're spot on there, Scott. Given the discussion that we're having, it sounds like privilege is a nuance. Privilege has to do with perspective. What's your definition of privilege, and how would we define it?
I guess for me, what privilege would be just how you handle the cards that you've been dealt. The cards that you've been dealt, how you live them, and how you move with them, and how you're able to grow and stuff. I mean, obviously not everyone is dealt the same cards, but I read this quote one time. It said, play your life with the cards you've been dealt like it's the ones that you wanted. Because at the end of the day, I mean, there's things that we can change and there's things that we can't.
Right.
But I guess it's about making the most of what you have. So.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that goes back to the idea about perspective, right, Maria? And cognitively framing, what you have and using that to the best of your ability. But simultaneously, I think one of the points that you're underscoring is that there is sometimes a certain randomness to what one person has over the other as well. That analogy of cards being dealt. What are your thoughts, Scott? How would you define privilege?
Well, it's very complicated to describe because there's so many factors, but I go back to an article I remember reading. I think it was Francis Kendall wrote, again, because I've read a lot about privilege, and particularly white privilege. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something to the effect, it's having more access to resources and power than others do based on what I look like.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's what it comes down to. Privilege is about having access to power and resources that other people don't have access to.
I would agree. I think for me, I know the first time I was called privileged, and I got very defensive about it because, you know, being Black and growing up not very affluent, I felt like, me privileged? But I've realized, and my definition for it right now is, do I have to make the same choices that others make? You know, I wake up in the morning, I'm like, hey, I want this for breakfast, or that for breakfast, whereas others might be saying, well, can I have breakfast this morning? You know, so people are making very, very different choices, kind of to Maria's point, given the hands that they've been dealt. And so relatively, I am absolutely more privileged than others. So I think thinking about it in that way, you know, access, you know, I think that's a really good definition for privilege. And
Access and power.
Correct. With access comes power. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what you're talking about too, and what Maria's talking about is it's in scale, right? And because even though you say you feel, you know, when you sit and you meditate on it, you think about it, that you do have privilege because you can choose what you're going to have for breakfast.
Right.
Yet you've lived a life also that has, you know, that has had limitations.
Right.
And it's like the pandemic right now, right? This is in scale. There are some people that are feeling certain squeezes just because it's not their normal life, yet there's other people that are having real issues.
Right.
So
Right.
Privilege is in scale as well.
One of the things that we see privilege as at Rise is an opportunity for you to be responsible. It gives you, you know, in some ways, some power and some responsibility to act. Do you all share that view? And, you know, I guess what are some of the ways in which you think you're responsible?
I definitely share that view. I grew up here in Miami. I have two immigrant parents that came from Nicaragua. My dad's a doctor. He works at Jackson Hospital, and my mom's an accountant. And I think of myself as being very privileged, you know, although there has been a lot of, you know, it wasn't the picture perfect life that everybody dreams of, but I'm very privileged to have a great support system and to have had access to many things. And I think it's a responsibility to pay it forward. It's a responsibility that I owe to, whether it's my team, whether it's my family, whether it's whoever I encounter on the street. It's just a humane thing to do. You know, we've been given these things of privilege. My parents have been able to help me get a college education or play soccer growing up. And there's a lot of people who haven't had that privilege. And I do think it's a responsibility that, and even if it's me going the extra mile for somebody, it's the right thing to do. But yeah.
Agreed. I love that sentiment.
You know, even though I may have grown up in a differently than where life's path has taken me, and I sit right now, and I've sat for the last couple of decades, I've always seen myself as a servant, and truly the privilege that I have, whatever that is, whether that's socioeconomic or power in my industry, that I'm to be a steward with the privilege that I have and then the access that I have to my time, treasure, and talent, right? So, and to me, it's you know, Maria, you nailed it. It's a responsibility. And it goes back to me, something that is very faith-based with me, where I believe, again, it's biblical, that to whom much is given, much more will be required. And I try to lead my life that way. And I understand and have understood that I've got this privilege, right? And it wasn't perfect early, but it continues to get better, and it continues to get better for me because I have this privilege of what I look like. And again, I believe the blessings that I have in life or the access that I have in life isn't for me to hoard to myself. It's for me to share with those who don't have the access, who don't have the privilege, who don't have the opportunity. So, you know, with that, again, Maria, I can't say it enough. You nailed it with the responsibility. There's a human responsibility that we all have when we are with whatever privilege we have.
Yeah, I agree. Growing up, my brother would always tell me, with great power comes great responsibility. It's very true. I've been privileged enough to have been captain to many teams and to have been able to give back. I love volunteering and all these things. And it's it's like you say with the Bible. My dad's also very religious, so we talk about the Bible a lot, and it's about paying it forward. You know, you learn more by being a servant leader than by keeping all of these blessings to yourself. There's so much more lessons and blessings that you learn by going the extra mile for somebody. And I've truly seen that in my life. It's how I choose to lead and how I choose to help. In my school, it's the slogan is building ethical leaders for life. And I think it's very true. You know, an ethical leader is someone who realizes that it's not about them, it's bigger than you, and it's about how you can help and influence other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and to piggyback on that, and, you know, part of my privilege in life became my job and where I was in my NFL life. And when I got to that position of again, a next station of influence and or power, or whatever we want to use, whatever that word is, you know, Andrew, you asked the question, you know, what do you do with it? What have you done? I mean, I have consciously, and that's the thing is, I think that you have to make conscious decisions. Right. You have to be intentional in what you're going to do. And when you ascend to one of those positions, I've made sure that along the way, as quietly as I've been able to do it, I have created opportunities and given opportunities for people that don't look like me, whether it's been hiring Black coaches and scouts, female coaches and scouts, by making sure that I open doors that wouldn't normally be open. And again, that's part of the responsibility. And I've done that throughout my NFL career. And even though I'm not in the NFL right now, I can do it and help and mentor and help people ascend and or teach them and educate them. Again, we all have time, treasure, and talent, and sharing those things is an obligation. And we can do it through work. We can do it socially. We can do it in many different ways.
I think that's excellent. One of the things that's not lost on me, though, is obviously both of you have been involved in sport at different levels throughout your lives and your career. So I just wondered, you know, it seems like faith is a big part of your perspective around privilege, but I wondered, did sport play any role, like either in your teams or the roles you've played on teams, in terms of how you understand power and privilege and access as well? I just wondered about that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very, very privileged to have played soccer. It's been one of my biggest blessings. And when I'm a going to be a fifth year senior, because I had to redshirt last year, so tore my knee up, very annoying. But I definitely learned so much throughout that process. And I thank God every day for allowing me to go through that, because I learned so much about what truly is a definition of power and leading. You know, so I'm the captain of my team, and the hardest thing that I had to do was, how do I lead from the bench? How do I lead while being sidelined? Right. You know, that was one of the biggest struggles. You know, I'm used to hard work ethic. I'm used to, you know, practice what I preach, set a standard, hold people accountable. But how do I do that from the bench? And I realized that it's really bigger than a ball. It's bigger than making somebody run faster. It's about caring about them. It's about, you know, if you take the time to care about somebody and you put in the work and you just value that relationship and that person, then you're able to do so much more. And through sports, through that specific instance, I was able to learn so much about, you know, the power I have in my hands of being a captain, of being a leader, of, you know, living my life a certain way, and the blessings that I've had to work with Rise, to participate in the events that I've done, to be the student-athlete president at my school, to do a lot of those things. And it's an awesome power, but I can never, some people say it's dangerous to have that crown on your head, you know, of power, and you can learn to love it too much. But through getting hurt and all that stuff, I learned that it's not about the crown. It's not about the captain band. It's not about the goals I score or don't score. It's really about the impact. about how I can help people with the power that I've accumulated through my hard work and my effort and all those things. So,
Scott, your thoughts on that question?
I think what sport has really done for me is it's been more, as much as anything, a reinforcement for me and of what is the truth. And when I was in the third grade, 7 years old, my school teacher in third grade was a woman by the name of Miss Cooper, who was the first Black school teacher in our entire school district. And I grew up in Orange County, New York. My parents were part of white flight out of New York City. They moved from the Bronx to Orange County. Our community, particularly our neighborhood, was largely New York City cops, New York City firemen, union workers, everyone that looked like us. And Miss Cooper, when I was, again, 7, was my third grade teacher, first Black school teacher in the district. And it was a woman that I watched go through it. Still to this day, she's one of my dear friends and heroes. She taught me at a young age the truth and how wrong racism is. Again, a woman who just loved these children every single day. None of them looked like her and maybe had looked like the rest of the community that didn't treat her well. So at 7 years old, right, you've got these conflicting things that you hear from adults that look like you, and then you have Miss Cooper, who's this shining star in every way, loving, gentle, kind, thoughtful, smart, everything that you're taught that she's not going to be, or told that she's not going to be. That set the stage where it made me look at people that didn't look like me differently. So in the sports world, when I played Little League Baseball, when I played football, every station in life, whether it was in elementary school, junior school, high school, being a college football player, I had consistent and constant reinforcement to me because of the people that didn't look like me, because of my Black teammates. I saw firsthand the truth, right? Which is that, yes, we were culturally different, but we were not different. We should be treated the same. So to me, the world of sports, again, was just this consistent reinforcer. And then when I left, got done playing, I got into coaching. So my entire life has been spent in a diverse community that has reinforced the truth of equality.
Right. I think that's a powerful story as well. I think we often describe sport as a unifier, something that can bring people together. And I think that's something that you're definitely sharing there, Scott. As we kind of wrap up our conversation, I just want to leave with two kind of questions. So in this one, I'm asking you literally to put yourselves in other people's shoes. So why do you think people potentially get defensive when talking or thinking about privilege, especially white privilege? Why do you think that is?
People just love power. People like having power, and if it's sometimes hard to imagine not having that power or not having those privileges. It's hard to see it in another way, and sometimes you don't want to get rid of the power. You want to keep it because it can give you access to certain things that a person who is not, for example, white, or even a male and a female. There are certain things that a male can access that would be much harder for a female to get. And if I were to ask a male to put themselves in a female's shoe, they might be defensive just because they don't want to lose what comes to them more easy than for a female.
I think the words white privilege creates defensiveness for a very natural reason, right? It's the words. Right. The word white, received by most white people, really makes people uncomfortable, right? Because when when anyone is defined by their race, it often makes you feel uncomfortable, right? Or makes, because it triggers something, because you're wondering because again, you have this, it's a little bit of guilt, quite honestly, is why the word makes many people feel uncomfortable. Then you get to the word privilege. The word privilege is unsettling to people because it makes the people that are in that community of being defined as privileged as being people who have never struggled or never worked hard for anything. So It's a word that I actually like because this is a great question, Andrew, because there are many words that we have used and created over the last several years to soften the impact of the words. White privilege is one of those words, or those two words. I like them because they are not softened. They do make people uncomfortable. And I think in order to have certain conversations, you have to be uncomfortable. We've gone from calling equality, right? We use this phrase diversity and inclusion now. And I understand what diversity means. I know what inclusion means, but we've moved away from using the word equality. And to me, that's a big problem because there's people that look like me that feel less offended or less uncomfortable when they hear diversity and inclusion, when really what diversity and inclusion is about is equality. And there's a lot of people that don't want to hear the word equality because they don't want the feeling that others are equal to them. And to me, the word white privilege, again, in the definition or just hearing that word, I think it certainly just creates discomfort for the reasons I mentioned.
Spot on. Last question. Let's kind of end with your kind of takeaways or your message to others. You know, as we think and talk about privilege, what do you think there's one thing you'd ask people to think about or consider as they engage with the notion or the concept of privilege? So your kind of take home to others who might be doing this activity or maybe who've come over the concept or notion of privilege for the first time.
I think it's one thing to evaluate where you are on the privilege meter, but I think it's another thing to see what you're going to do with it. You know, we all are on a meter on this for the example we did today. Wherever you land, I think there's still some amount of privilege that we all have. And I think it's, like I said earlier, if I had to ask or give a tip or say something, I think it's your responsibility to give back. It's your responsibility to pay it forward because although sometimes life may seem dark, some other people might have it darker. And I definitely think that we need to keep paying it forward and keep being selfless, you know, and just put yourself in other people's shoes and understand that it might not have been the same way for them. And it's just your responsibility to keep helping and paying it forward.
Great. I love that response. Let me hear you, Scott.
I don't know if I should be advising people, right, how to feel or what to do. I would be hopeful, though, that people that have privilege are thankful for it, that they own it. At times you may feel power or powerful because of it, but share it. Again, Maria mentioned the word responsibility. I think that there is responsibility with it, and I encourage those that have privilege to share what they have, which is proximity, which is access, which is opportunity. And I think to the people that don't have privilege, I ask with love in my heart, saying, please hold people accountable, but be willing to share grace. And when I say that, there's a time and a way to hold people responsible and accountable for those that misuse, abuse their privilege. Remind people without hopefully making it an absolute aggressive gotcha moment. Because I think if there's not enough grace between the parties, that we're not going to get to the places that we need to be. And not that it's going to be easy, not that it's going to be without emotion, not that it's going to be without anger, but even when you do get angry about it, on either side that you're on, stand back, be still, and consider grace. And consider putting yourself in the position, even people that have less privilege, understand that there are some people that act and behave with their privilege that are ignorant in the truest sense, that they just don't understand fully, and they've never taken the time to acknowledge what they have. And to those in the position of privilege and power, stand back and see, and not that you will ever know. For as much work as I do in this area, I will never know what it's like to be you, Andrew. I will never fully know what it's like to be you, Maria, because I can't. I can only see what happens. I can't truly feel it. So to those with privilege, please stand down, receive it, and extend grace. And I ask both sides to extend grace in both directions.
Thank you. Thank you. I really want to thank you both for joining us and going through this activity with us, for sharing your thoughts on the activity, for sharing your thoughts on privilege, power, and access more broadly. I think it was a really great discussion. It really shows the reflection that is necessary and needed as people think about the ways in which they can care for others. I think that was one of the words that Maria used that I think is really powerful. Talking about the responsibility we have for one another. And to your point, Scott, really thinking about how we engage with others, even as we are, emotionally disturbed at maybe the privilege and power that people have. I think if we are to come together and really have a great society, we need to have educated, positive, productive conversations. Thank you both once again.